Welcome back to Introducing Virginia Mysteries, episode number 4, Lawyer Up. This episode, we will investigate John Grisham's Grey Mountain, a legal thriller with just a little bit of aviation crime. So for our interviews in this episode, we heard from my father, Swain Wood, who's the lawyer, and Febronia's father, who's airport security officer. This episode will include spoilers to Grisham's Grey Mountain, and it will contain some adult topics, so please be mindful if you're listening with children. Here are Libby and Febronia with their discussion on the book.
Okay, so Grey Mountain by John Grisham is actually the first book in our set of books that starts in the 2000s. It is 2008 that it is set in, even though it was written 2014, following a lawyer. Her name is Samantha Kofer.
Love.
She is an associate, but the firm that she's working at is getting shut down because of the recession. That started around 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
And so they put her on a furlough. So basically they said, if you go and work as an intern for free at one of these volunteer places, we'll take you back in about a year. You know, because it was easier than firing her or laying her off.
Times are tough.
Yeah. So she was having a hard time trying to find a place to go because this is what's happening to all the lawyers in New York. They're getting furloughed. And so now she's like trying to find a place and no one wants any more interns. And then she finally finds one in this made up location called Brady, Virginia.
Love. Okay.
With a legal aid clinic. And on her way there, she gets stopped by a lunatic cop and...
I like the way you said that.
Well, he's known for being crazy, so...
Okay.
And then she gets saved by Donovan Gray, who is a lawyer in Brady, Virginia.
Gray.
Yes, you're gonna be so sad when you find out what happens to him.
God. I don't want to know. Keep going.
But she goes to the legal aid clinic to like do an interview with, turns out, Donovan's aunt, Maddie.
Ooh.
And she gets the job because she was the first lawyer to show up. That's literally it. That's all Maddie's requirement was.
Good on
You're
her.
the first one to show up. Take the job.
Good on her.
And then she ends up taking a lot of cases that are more like pro bono cases. So like she's helping a woman through her abusive husband. She's helping another woman get her job back after getting fired for having money being taken from her by the government, even though the government's not supposed to.
Yeah.
Or the insurance company, sorry, not the government. But an insurance company was taking money from her when they're not supposed to. And then she got fired because of it. It's a hot mess. And then she's also dealing with Donovan, trying to get her to help him fight coal companies because they are destroying the land. They are destroying the mountains. They are destroying the land. But she doesn't want to help him because Donovan does some kind of shady stuff to get the coal companies.
What?
Yeah, Donovan does shady stuff, so she doesn't want to help him because she doesn't want to get into the shady.
No, good on her.
And then Donovan dies. In a plane crash.
Whoa, wait, that was quick.
Donovan dies in a plane crash. And so his brother Jeff uses Samantha as cover-up to try and get the secret documents that Donovan was going to use against a coal company moved from the cave they're keeping it in to somewhere else, while also highlighting the fact that these coal companies are constantly killing people and destroying land because they have no care for the legality of everything that they're doing. Making sure that it's safe, making sure that no one gets hurt. They don't care. They're skirting on the edge of the law.
But also the way that they're destroying the land is also inadvertently destroying the people who live there by destroying their land and polluting their water, polluting their soil.
Knocking a boulder off so that it hits their trailer.
Exactly.
Darn.
Yeah. But, well, yeah.
Jeez, yeah, it sounds reminiscent of today's times. Anyways, continue.
Well, I mean, that was basically it. Jeff used Samantha, and then Samantha ends up staying in Brady at the end because she decides she actually prefers helping people than doing the big lawyer stuff, where she's just in charge of landscaping.
Yeah. Talk to me about Grisham.
Okay, so Grisham was born in 1955 in Arkansas. He's actually been from the South generally pretty much all his life. You know, from Arkansas to Mississippi, and then from Mississippi to right now Central Virginia is where he currently lives. But as a child, he had to move around a lot because his dad was a cotton farmer and an itinerant construction worker. And growing up, he had a love for writing because even though his mom and his dad never went to college, they really wanted to ingrain to him that he should like to read. So she was always encouraging him to read.
Yeah.
And he went to college and ended up, for the first 2 years, he didn't know what he wanted to do, but he eventually got his degree in law school, much like him, a certain author from last book. And then he opened up his own clinic, and he did a bunch of lawyer work, and then one day he went into the courthouse and saw a case go down. And from that case, he was like, I want to write a book about that. Wow. So he wrote his first book, A Time to Kill. And then from there, he started writing a bunch of other books after originally having A Time to Kill be rejected 28 times. But he ended up going and writing more books because he was really into it. And then at one point, he ended up just closing his clinic down completely and switching from working as a writer part-time to working as a writer full-time. And that's pretty much everything about...
Nice. All right, give me some main points, some main themes.
Okay, so... just like Absolute Power, Grisham seems to focus a lot on the corruption within the coal companies because of the fact that, you know, they're doing whatever they want because they think they can get away with it. Because a lot of times they do. You know, they don't get the necessary consequences in court. And I felt that corruption also kind of trickled down to FBI, the FBI agencies, at least in Grisham's book, because, you know, a lot of the FBI agents that were there investigating Donovan after his death felt a little cocky about it.
Yeah.
To say. They felt a little cocky about it. Like they're power tripping. They're like, I can do whatever I want. I'm going to get who I want because I'm an FBI agent.
Those smug little guys.
Yeah. And then he also covers environmental sustainability because of the fact that they're describing how destroyed the land is getting from how the coal companies are operating on them.
Yeah.
So it's getting kind of like ugly. And there's also intergenerational trauma because Donovan lost his mom at 16 because she killed herself after their own land. It was a mountain called Grey Mountain.
Whoa.
Yeah, their land got destroyed because their father sold it to a coal company thinking that he would get money.
They sold it to those jerks?
Yeah, which obviously pissed the rest of the family off because they didn't agree. The father was just like, surprise! I sold our land to a coal company, now we're going to get a lot of money.
What a sweet surprise.
Yeah, no, they didn't get money because the coal company tried to put it off long enough to drive them a little insane. So they never actually got their money either.
Who would have guessed?
Who would have thunk? But that caused a lot of trauma, and it also kind of relates to Poe as well because Poe's foster father was also a terrible person.
Oh, yeah.
He wouldn't help Poe through his tuition. He didn't want to officially adopt Poe because, according to him, he already had 3 other children. Yeah. So he doesn't want to take care of Poe, too.
Why would we want a 4th?
No. Yeah. And also, Poe's foster mother was dead. She died. Just like Donovan, although the reason they lost their mothers is obviously different. And there's also the fact that there seems to be like a 2 wrongs don't make a right kind of situation happening because... you know, the coal companies are doing things wrong because they're not taking care of the land as they're mining it, which is what leads to so many people getting hurt or being killed by, like, a falling boulder.
For instance. Funny that keeps coming up. Anyways.
But despite... And then Donovan, to get back at these companies for doing such horrendous things, also does bad things, which is what ends up getting him killed. But also, they managed to move the documents to supposedly at the end. Maybe. We don't know because we don't see beyond that point. But they may have potentially gotten that coal company. Kroll Mining is the one they're fighting at the end with the company. No, with the secret papers.
There we go.
Secret documents. So it's like they both get what they deserve because they were doing things incorrectly, illegally.
I see.
Ish. And Poe does the same thing, but with the Black Cat, where the narrator gets caught because he's, you know, he killed his wife, and then he gets caught and arrested by the police.
Yep.
And there's also a bit of a mountain comparison there because the mountains are such an important part in Grey Mountain when highlighting the environmental costs, and you have the Ragged Mountain, which is like, seems like a really beautiful yet creepy place that also has a lot of influence on the people with its history, and the coal companies are kind of destroying that history in their own sense.
Yeah.
Samantha and Poe also both had found family in the sense where Samantha's parents weren't really there for her because they were both busy with their law-based jobs.
Yeah.
Even though she was an only child, which also explains why she ended up becoming a lawyer herself to try and get closer to them, even though that never really happened. And her dad spent most of his time in jail most of her life as well. And so she found family when she went to the law firm with Maddie because Maddie and all the other people there seemed to care about her so much compared to her own family. So she kind of had that found family with them, not to mention Donovan had found family in the fact that Maddie was kind of like his mother figure after his mom died. And Poe had something similar where his aunt, Maria Clems, it's one of the two, but pronounced one of those ways. But she was like his aunt and also his mother-in-law, but she was also a mother figure to him.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that he didn't have any mother figure in his life, and she was always like very caring, very loving towards him. And that was his own way of having found family, even though they're technically blood related. It wasn't blood relations in the way that their relationship worked.
Yeah. So what does that say about Virginia today?
I think that says that Virginia, first of all, has a lot of sad kind of eeriness when you look at it, because you like look at certain areas that are very populated now and you think about all the land and mountains that were destroyed because of the construction that's happening, like
for our comfort.
Yeah, like in Crozet, for example, we were there and we were talking with Phil and Sally, and they were talking about how historical houses get torn down, even when the people don't want it, and it's also, in that own sense, it's also in a way ruining the nature and the landscape because you're taking down part of its beauty, which was the more old-fashioned houses that didn't cause as much damage for more modern houses that take down a lot more space. And there's also the fact that Virginia is a little corrupt itself when it comes to companies because we have so many data centers here, which are being paid for and operated by companies that don't seem to care for the nature, because you go to Ashburn, it's just data centers everywhere. Yeah. There's nothing nice about Ashburn. No offense to the people that live in Ashburn, but it looks like data center central.
Well, I'm sure they didn't want it.
And at the end of the day, though, it does also highlight that Virginia is still beautiful because we have really nice mountains, we have really nice nature when it's not overtaken by, a bunch of buildings. And that's highlighted from the fact that they were constantly describing how nicely, like, for example, Grey Mountain, which is also a fictional mountain. Do not try and hike it. It does not exist.
Oh.
But it's like, it used to be really beautiful, and that's how they described it, and then it got turned into this ugly brown grassed place because of all the destruction they did towards it just to get coal.
Before we get into our interview with Mr. Zaki Farowez, this episode's cover features pictures from IVM's field trip to the Library of Congress, a sculpture of Beethoven, and some very old Virginian music. So here is Febronia and her dad.
If everybody sees this one, this is the ID for the airport. So this ID, only the people pass the exam and they work in the airport has the ID. We have like 3 ID, not only this one. One is called red. Red, you can like enter to the airport, but you just go into the passenger area upstairs. Green one or purple one, you can go anywhere at the airport. But to drive at the airport, you have to have that. You have to get the D ladder. See the D ladder? This means you can drive at the airport. And the blue one, we have another one is called a blue one. This I can be at the airport here, and same time I can be in a region airport. And if you see at the top here, this is the orange one. This the people can see like I can escort somebody with me. So if somebody like my company request a mechanic or captain to the aircraft or somebody not you couldn't open the door, I have the right to escort him, and I have to be with him until he finishes his job. He can't go nowhere without me. And here, if you see this number, this is the number for my number at the airport. So, and when I open the door, I have to put my PIN number, so nobody can take my badge and just to go and open the door. So you have to have all the information. And this one, every year we renew it. In like me, in before December 19, I gotta renew it every year. Otherwise, it's gonna stop automatically not work. That's it. Enough.
What are the biggest challenges of your job?
Okay, biggest challenge always for me, like to deal with the people. Plus, I deal with the people and deal with the customer because I have too many airline and each airline has a different rule and have to get him the right people. They know how to do his flight. So this is give me very, very big headache.
Very big headache.
Yeah.
And then what are the most fun or most fulfilling aspects of the job?
Okay, the most fun or a job, like you always like have a good friend and bad friend, that's a job. When you have a good friend, you always has a fun with him. Sometimes I'll be happy when I send the correct crew for the flight and they start like appreciate us like the job done on time because like when we do the job we have to push the aircraft on time before take a delay so nobody can miss his flight.
Mhm. In my opinion, the most fun part about your job is when you defrost the planes in the winter.
Oh, this you just said I probably have a page for oh difference, yeah, I have a page for
Uh,
yeah.
okay. You work at a large airport, Dulles IAD. Some of the books we've been reading feature regional airports. However, what are some of the key security differences between an international airport and a regional airport?
Okay, for the international airport it's totally. I couldn't say it's totally different, but all the system should be applied for the ID. But for the international, just each flight, like each company, like Virgin coming from British or coming from Germany, each company has a different security. Plus, when you travel by international, you should be have your passport. If you don't have passport, you couldn't travel. But for region one, you only can travel by your ID, the real ID. So you don't need the passport.
Okay. And then one of our books, Grey Mountain by John Grisham, includes a murder by airplane tampering. In real life, how difficult would it be to sabotage an aircraft in such a way that the pilot would crash and die?
Okay, sabotage. It's not easy. Somebody can touch the aircraft because, like, we have as a report training is that if you see something, say something. This means if I see somebody like I feel he's not working at the airport, I gotta challenge him. The, this takes more security. So as soon as I challenge him, I get a call the police MWA. It's not the normal police. Plus we have another MWA there and plus a lot of people around you. So it's not easy somebody can sabotage the aircraft.
Okay. And then would such a homicide be easier to perpetrate in a regional airport compared to a larger or international airport?
No, it should be everything for the security and all the stuff. I believe everything is work similar because I don't want to tell you each flight is like has a million dollars. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not gonna be easy. The security is gonna be the same everywhere.
And then what systems are normally in place to protect planes from sabotage? You kind of talked about it already, but is there more you could tell us?
Yeah, the captain when he come, he checks the aircraft and he searches the aircraft around. He wanna make sure everything going as the book said. If he notice anything different, he report right away. He not gonna drive without a check. He like each captain before he come like he take like almost like if we are a small aircraft like 10-15 minutes. For the big aircraft he take like 30 minutes, check everything is working, everything is fine. He come downstairs, search all the flight around, plus the mechanic there, he search the aircraft too.
That's good.
So, little disclaimer before my interview with my dad, we did record this next to a lake. So, there will be sounds that happen on a lake that are captured in the recording, and we hope that that doesn't bother you too much. My discussion with my dad mostly pertains to the chemical company DuPont in this episode and how that particularly relates to the coal companies in Gray Mountain and their kind of shady behavior towards locals and just the connections therein. But we hope you enjoy. Here we are. So, what's been your involvement against DuPont?
So, when I was the number 2 lawyer at the North Carolina Department of Justice, we brought a lawsuit against a spin-off company of DuPont. Well, actually 2 different lawsuits. One was brought in, I think it was the fall of 2017. And we were, that was when it had become clear that the Cape Fear River had been contaminated with a chemical called Gen X, or it's like a group of chemicals maybe. Wasn't entirely clear what, like exactly what the effects of the chemical were, but let's just say it's not good. It's not good for you. Not good for fish, not good for any kind of life, really. It's not like acutely poisonous or anything. But it had largely come from a plant that DuPont had operated for years and then sort of set up this new company called Chemours to take it over in Fayetteville, which discharged out into the Cape Fear River. So the first lawsuit was in the fall of 2017 trying to stop the discharges from happening, just to get the court to shut it down and make DuPont / Chemours put some measures in place to keep contamination from going into the river. And we got a pretty quick order from the court that was positive, and we ended up negotiating a consent order, which basically means an order that both sides agree to, but it's an order from the court that required the company to do some remediation and do some things to make sure they weren't continuing to contaminate. Then later, a few years later, we filed another lawsuit basically for damages relating to that contamination, like damages to the natural resources of the state. So that one is more about money, and that one is actually still going on. Mm. So my role was in the first one, my role was to like get the environmental lawyers in my office to come up with a theory that would allow the court to shut down the Chemours plant. And then the second one, my main role was to try to negotiate a resolution that would lead to money being paid to the state of North Carolina for environmental cleanup.
And would the consenting order imply that DuPont / Chemours are not necessarily outright denying or refusing the allegations?
Well, in order to get the order, the court would have to conclude that there was a substantial likelihood that we were going to win the case, and that DuPont Chemours was going to be found liable.
Mm-hmm.
That's a legal requirement for a court order like that.
Mm. So DuPont's case was not strong.
So it kind of implies that they did do wrongdoing. I don't remember whether the consent order admits or says that they don't admit wrongdoing. It's common for them to say that, but the court has to conclude that they're probably going to be found liable.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your question exactly?
Did DuPont ever seem like they thought themselves as not guilty?
Well, I think they thought, I mean, I only dealt with the lawyers, right? I didn't deal with the actual executives. So I think they definitely thought that there was a chance that they might win. And even our lawyers thought there was no way we were going to win at the beginning. Because they were like, like the sort of way that they had traditionally approached, these sort of career-long environmental lawyers, they had traditionally approached some of these issues, just created a lot of roadblocks to bringing a claim against Chemours in that situation. But the governor at the time, Roy Cooper, was very clear that he wanted to figure out a way to, be creative about legal theories. So, after conferring with the governor and his team, I went to my team and said, we got to figure out a way we got to figure out a good argument here. And we did. We figured one out.
Mm. And at that point, was the consenting order effectively like a resignation on DuPont's part?
Well, I mean, they were motivated to do it because of the strong possibility that the court would order them to do something worse for them, and just kind of more unpredictable and maybe not even as effective.
What might that be?
The court could say, well, I'm going to order you to pay fines of $1,000 a day until this is done, or something like that, until this is fixed. As opposed to step by step, you're going to have to build a barrier wall to keep the contamination from going into the river. You're going to have to, later it turned out that they had to build, I forget what it's called, maybe thermal oxidizer or something, to capture the air emissions, to keep the Gen X from escaping through air emissions. basically to stop all emissions from the plant. But the court could have ordered, the judge isn't an environmental lawyer. So it's kind of a wild card what the judge might do.
Just because we hadn't touched on it, what did your team deduce was the environmental detriment of Gen X?
Well, there were some studies saying that it would have long-term health effects on humans and also other aquatic life. And it's in a class of chemical compounds that have been proven to have such effects. Cancer, all kinds of things. It's not the science directly tying these specific compounds to those outcomes. At the time, and I haven't kept up with it, so I don't know whether it's been updated in the last couple of years, but there wasn't like direct science linking these specific compounds, but there was linking very, very similar compounds. And, so the pathways for negative health effects, most reasonable people would believe are pretty similar.
Did the term cancer cluster ever come up?
Yeah. And I think to my knowledge, there's not a proven cancer cluster. Proven is also a term that can be defined different ways. There's not been a generally accepted, either judicially or scientifically, cancer cluster that has been conclusively tied to Gen X that I know of. But that doesn't mean it's not there. It's very hard to sort of disaggregate all the data and figure out what caused certain things, which is one of the reasons why it's important for the state to be able to bring a claim like this as opposed to individuals. Or as opposed to individuals having to do it themselves. Individuals can do it themselves. It's just much more like they have to prove that chemical caused that cancer.
And why is it advantageous for the state to be able to do that?
Because the state doesn't have to prove causation in quite the same way. So, the state can prove. The state just has various statutes and laws that give it the ability to bring kind of enforcement actions without having to show that the cancer was directly caused by the chemical.
How did DuPont's pollution even get on your radar?
Governor Cooper's general counsel called me up and said the governor wants to have a conference call to figure out what to do about this. And at the same time, the governor called the attorney general and said, we need to figure out something to do about this. It was in the press at the time. It had come out in the press. I forget what prompted it to come out in the press. There might have been some kind of whistleblower at the State Department of Environmental Quality. And there was some evidence that under the previous governor, McCrory, they had kind of, I wouldn't say covered up, but they hadn't exactly widely publicized what they knew about this chemical. it came out. I'm pretty sure there was a whistleblower, now that I think about it, who came out and sort of revealed some information to the press, or somehow it made its way to the press. And when, that causes people to be scared, because like a few million people rely on Cape Fear River for their drinking water. And there's also, in areas near the plant, there's lots of wells. And when we found out that it was going through, so sometimes I think the river can contribute to well water and wells that are really close to the river. But when we found out that it was escaping through the air emissions as well, which then fall to the earth through rain, gets down into wells, we realized that it wasn't just people who were drinking Cape Fear River water who were at risk.
Were any testimonies from the communities that rely on that water ever important in your...
Yeah, I think they were the primary reason why we ended up taking action, is because we knew there were a lot of people who were relying on us to make sure their drinking water was safe.
What other resources might these communities have besides legal action?
Well, there's also electoral avenues for them to elect leaders locally, statewide, and nationally that are gonna, make sure that their drinking water is safe. They can speak out publicly, they can talk to the press. All the sort of ways to participate in the public sphere.
So,
so one thing that does is that tends to prioritize issues raised by people who are more easily able to participate in that public sphere.
So recently, related to environmental pollution at the hands of corporations, the recent ruling in the Supreme Court came out a few weeks ago in Monsanto versus Durnell. What are your reactions to this ruling?
The ruling was that the EPA, the federal EPA, had said that for this chemical you have to use this label. And the plaintiff was saying, and Monsanto used that label that was mandated by the EPA. The plaintiff said, no, that label isn't sufficient because it fails to warn about the risk of cancer. And what the Supreme Court said was, under the Federal Supremacy Clause, the federal law, which is the EPA mandate, preempts or displaces state law legal claims that would require a different result.
I remember that now.
Yeah. So it's not really the Supreme Court saying anything about the merits of his claims other than that they're preempted by federal law, and so if you want to change that, the way to do it is to change the EPA rule.
Have you had any other experiences with Monsanto?
I know some of the lawyers who represented Monsanto in negotiating a multi-billion-dollar settlement for all those claims. And they're actually, some of them are the same lawyers who represented Chemours and DuPont in the case that we talked about, the North Carolina cases. And so, interestingly, those lawyers have a tendency to try to be very proactive in these situations and actually resolve the cases as opposed to necessarily win the cases. And there are other lawyers, focused on winning the cases, but these guys specialize in, like, what if we don't win? Getting to a resolution that everyone would agree to. And interestingly, some of those same lawyers were also involved in the opioid settlements, and a couple of them were involved in the national tobacco settlement back in the 90s, which remains the biggest civil litigation settlement in terms of money of all time. But so I actually think I think that's what lawyers ought to do when they're representing defendants in cases like that, is figure out how to, like when there's a situation where some serious harm has been done, figure out a way to resolve it, while obviously, you have to defend your client, but a lot of times, in fact almost always, figuring out a resolution between the parties leads to a better result than whatever the court outcome is going to be. And that's what happened here. I mean, that I think it was like a $5 billion settlement for all the people who were injured by Roundup over the years is just gone now.
What do you mean?
I mean, it was not finalized.
So there was a $5 billion
There was a $5
billion
settlement on the table.
And it's
didn't get finalized. I don't know all the stories about how far it got, whether it might have been contingent on the Supreme Court case or whatever. But if the plaintiffs had taken that or something close to it, rather than pushing the Supreme Court appeal, then the Supreme Court case would never have been decided.
How would you characterize this difference between resolution and winning?
Well, I think a resolution can be winning, but when I'm using those terms, I mean like a judge deciding versus the opposing parties agreeing to something. A judge and or jury deciding versus the parties figuring out their own. Like, they can come up with almost anything they want to between the two of them. And sometimes it's more than the two of them. It's like multi-party, which was the case in all of these cases that we're talking about.
Do big companies tend to employ big law firms?
Yes.
And do big law firms tend towards resolution as opposed to winning?
Well, I mean, I think most lawyers tend towards resolution as opposed to winning. And, big is not big versus small is not necessarily the distinction I would draw. I mean, it gets at a certain truth, but it's a little bit overly simplified because there are big law firms that exclusively represent plaintiffs, and then there are big law firms that generally represent defendants, occasionally represent plaintiffs. And then there are some big law firms that exclusively represent defendants. So, but I think frankly, the better lawyers tend to think a lot more about resolution than about winning, because they recognize that winning is doesn't really mean that much, because people sort of, there's just kind of in common understanding, people tend to misunderstand the civil justice system. I mean, winning in a criminal case is like you're either guilty or you're not guilty. That's a little easier to understand, winning versus not winning. But in a civil case, it's almost always just about money. It's not about like who's right, who's wrong. It's not about morality. It's not, because the court just doesn't sit in judgment of those things. Like a jury verdict saying DuPont's liable, or a court order saying DuPont's liable, is really only focused on how much money is DuPont going to have to pay the people who got harmed, and or what we call injunctive relief, which is, are there like things that the court can order the defendant to do? So it can get a little dangerous, I think, for people to equate the civil justice system too much with just kind of moral judgments. I mean, in the criminal case, part of the whole point of it is to make a moral judgment that somebody's a criminal. But in a civil case, that's not really the purpose historically, of the civil justice system. Now, I can understand why people think of it that way very commonly, but it can be dangerous to do that, I think.
Why is that dangerous?
Because then you will sometimes sacrifice a better result. Like, for example, in the Monsanto case. The Supreme Court ruling doesn't say Monsanto are nice people or they're bad people. It just says under federal law and the Constitution, you can't hold them liable in this situation. But, and I don't know, I mean, there's some pretty sophisticated plaintiffs' lawyers in that case. So I don't think they were approaching it as an opportunity to have kind of a moral judgment be made. But what's dangerous about thinking of it too much that way is that it can lead you to not take results that will improve your client's situation, and you'll end up leaving them worse off than they would have been.
Well, actually, in the book, the case was that a coal truck had inadvertently or otherwise pushed a enormous boulder off of the mountain that they were strip mining, and this boulder rolled down the mountain at incredible velocity and flattened someone's RV with their children inside.
Oh my God.
And the mother was the client that the lawyer was representing, and he repeatedly refused to settle for an amount that he thought was not large enough because of his own personal grievances with coal companies in his past.
But do you know why plaintiffs' lawyers do that sometimes?
In the book, it was
their payment is based on how big the settlement is.
Mhm.
So they get a percentage of the settlement. So if it's not as big as that, so like it's their money too. And so they're sort of putting their own personal interests ahead of that of their clients, which to me is malpractice. And technically to anyone is malpractice, but it happens every day.
Well, actually, in the book, the lawyer, before the settlement, the several $1 million settlement, once it does reach a large number after the verdict was given, and before the settlement could be finalized or signed or anything, the plaintiff's lawyer died or was killed in suspicious circumstances before the settlement even got legally confirmed. But so that mostly concerns Donovan Gray. He was the one pursuing the coal companies and doing this kind of gambling with his plaintiff. But Samantha was only in town because she was working at this free legal aid clinic on furlough. So could you just describe what you know and your experiences with furloughs and law firms, and how might they differ from other kinds of jobs?
Well, when you say furlough, you mean basically getting laid off?
Yeah, like a undetermined layoff. Would you say this was realistic, and did this happen around 2008?
Oh yeah. I mean, there were lots of younger lawyers, in particular at big firms, who got laid off during the financial crisis. And there was just a lot of squeezing in the legal profession generally, and that, that continues to happen. That's happened, but that was a big moment for it.
How did the financial aid crisis beget that?
Not financial aid.
I mean, how did
financial crisis.
How did the financial crisis precipitate that?
By wrecking the economy, by causing a lot of businesses to lose a huge amount of money, which meant that they needed all of a sudden to cut costs substantially. Legal spend is a cost that you can often cut substantially. Like one of the big drivers of the growth of law firms has been not litigation, but corporate transactions, mergers and acquisitions. None of that was happening in any sort of good way back in those days, in 2008, 2009. Because the stock market was way down, the economy was in the tank. So businesses were just not sending work to law firms, and so law firms didn't have work to do. So they didn't need, especially like the people who are least protected, whose jobs are least protected in a law firm, are the staff and the younger associates. So yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people. I know a lot of really, really excellent lawyers who got laid off in those days.
Certainly, free legal aid clinics were not immune to the financial crisis, but in Grey Mountain, somehow the legal mountain aid clinic in Brady seemed to keep going. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, they're less directly tied to the overall economy.
right, how do they? What is their role in the legal system? How do they exist?
They're still tied to it, but they're less directly tied. Like the story that I sketched out just now about how private law firms are impacted, it's a little more indirect with legal aid because they're funded by a combination of private donations and some tax money. And, and grants and things like that. So the grants and the private donations side of it took a huge hit during the financial crisis. But, there was still some. There was enough for them to survive. I don't think they were doing great. But they also had, to the extent a lot of them have some government funding. State and local governments did have to seriously pull back on a lot of things because they generally can't engage in, they have to have a balanced budget each year. So there were a lot of government cuts, but it's just more indirect for businesses. Like it takes longer for that to play out because, like, by the time, like in North Carolina, for example, the fiscal year is July 1 to June 30th. So if something happens in September, it's not really going to affect the budget, the state budget, until 9 months later.
How important are legal aid clinics in areas like Appalachia?
I think they're incredibly important because they're the only way that, in a lot of situations, they're the only way that people without a lot of money can get good lawyers.
I'm just reading some of these edits that they made. So, 2008 is, as a context, the main protagonist of the book is a woman, and she's, of course, just been furloughed, laid off, effectively, from her big firm in New York. And she goes to work at this legal aid clinic, and it turns out that she really ends up liking working for in this environment where she feels like the work is a lot more rewarding and fulfilling. Mm-hmm. And it's not so much about seemingly meaningless business transactions or, how to
a lot of people,
design a new skyscraper.
Have that reaction. Yeah.
And
so can I add one thing though? Is a lot of law firms do a substantial amount of pro bono work, which oftentimes you're working with legal aid lawyers in doing that. But anyway, so that's another way. Like, I mean, any respectable law firm does a lot of pro bono work.
Why is that?
I think it goes back to Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments. That there's an expectation now that sort of any respectable law firm will do pro bono work.
Would you share some thoughts on how women have been treated in big law firms and legal aid clinics? And can you recall a point where they might have broken more through the glass ceiling?
So it depends very, very much on the particular firm and or legal aid clinic. It's really about the people, and when I got out of law school, it was sort of towards the beginning of the years where there were roughly equal numbers of men and women in law school. You know, back in the 60s, for example, your cousin was at Harvard Law School in the class of 1963. She was one of like 8 women in the entire law school class of 550.
Janet, Rita?
Yeah, but my class was effectively 50-50, if not maybe even more women than men. So by now, I mean, I was on a call earlier today with two lawyers from a big firm in New York, two deputy AGs from New York, and me. I was the only male on the call. So like now, if there's a problem with the firm, there could still be, or with the organization, there could still be, and there still is, a lot of problems on that front. But it's really changed a huge amount, like in 40 years, I would say. It's even so when I started as a lawyer, it was basically 50-50 among the younger lawyers, but it was 80-20 or 90-10 among the more senior lawyers. And like the most senior lawyers, who at that time had gone to law school in like the late 50s, mid to late 50s, I don't think there were any women, but they were just starting to retire right then. So now the people who were younger lawyers then are now partners, and, fairly senior partners at this point. So, I mean, I think a huge amount of progress has been made, and there's just a lot more acceptance of parental leave, of work-life balance, things like that, than there was even when I started.
That's a common thread that runs through all of the legal thrillers that we read, because we also read David Baldacci's Absolute Power, where, especially the female lawyer in that book, Kate Whitney, kind of lives this glamorized yet stereotypical life of a lawyer who works 100 plus hours a week and never gets any sleep and has horrible eating habits. And yeah, but even then, that book came out in the 90s.
Yeah, and it was different then. I mean, it was different. It was changing, but it has changed a lot for the better in many ways. I mean, other things have changed for the worse, but gender equality in the legal profession has changed a lot for the better in the last 30 years.
So, could you...
I mean, you have 4 Supreme Court justices now. You had 1 back then. You have a huge number of, it's not unusual for there to be a female judge or a female lawyer, for that matter. It's just not a strange thing. Back, in the 70s it was very strange. In the 90s it was kind of starting to... And part of it also is, I think a lot of women would say they felt like they had to act in a certain way in order to be successful, and that's changed too in most places that have a good culture. But not every firm or other legal organization has a good culture.
Would you say that the legal field is kind of exceptional in that regard?
Well, I don't really know, because it's the one that I know the most about. But I think that's happened in other professions as well. I think there are places where it hasn't really happened, and there still is a big gender imbalance, like among tech entrepreneurs, for example. Politics still. Academia, I think, you'd have to ask your mother about that, but I think that's traditionally thought of as one that has tended to be more friendly towards women, but again, it really depends on the institution and the people. I think huge strides have been made. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's perfect. But increasingly, the people who are in positions of power now are people like my age or even younger who came up in a world where everybody they were working with was not an all-male type of situation.
Many thanks to Mr. Farowez and Mr. Wood for these interviews. Thank you again to Libby and Febronia and Professor Hammond. Next episode, number 5, Blacktop Wasteland by S.A. Cosby. We got to speak with Cosby himself. You can support us at su.edu/arts/English. I am Andrew Wood, and I will see you in the next one.